So let's have a look at how great our dependency graph looks now that we have a nicely decoupled application. I'm going to go up to the Resharper menu, go to Architecture and choose View Project Dependencies. Here is something that you might find concerning. There are dependencies from the UI project to my data and email dependencies. Because we are dependency injecting these components, we want to see these projects completely decoupled from the UI. We want there to be no link between the UI project and the dependencies for two reasons. The first is that it's very easy then to know that all the developers on the team are in fact injecting their dependencies. It's great for a team to be able to generate the dependency graph each sprint and see at a glance that no hard-coded dependencies have been introduced. And as well as that, having no link between the project and the dependencies also discourages developers from taking naughty shortcuts. If there's already a reference from the UI project to the dependency, it's easy for the devs to hard code dependencies with the intention of coming back later to tidy them up. If they've actually got to add the reference to the dependency, they don't seem to do this. So why is there this link from our UI project to our dependencies? Let's have a look. So the reason that there is a dependency showing on the dependency map is that in this mapping class, we need to associate the interface with the dependency. So that because this class that's doing the mapping is in the UI project, that means the UI project actually has a link to the dependency. We can resolve this by moving the mapping class into its own project. So I'm just going to jump down here and I'm going to add a new project. And I'm going to call it atoms.onlinestore.di mapper. I could call it, often I'll call it dependency resolver. Okay, so now I've created a new project, and what I'm going to do is I want to get rid of this mapping here out of our web UI project, so we can see that that's happening up here. So I'm just going to comment that out. And what I'm instead going to do is, I'll actually copy those, and I want to do that same work in here in my DI mapper project. Now, so we're going to end up with quite a lot of these mappings. So I like to break them up. And to start with, we'll just break them up into two lots. We'll make one for the business, we'll create one for the business layer and one for the data layer. So we'll create one and we'll create a public class and we'll call it business registry, and that will implement the AutoFac module. Oh, so I've missed a step. So what I need to do to be able to, in this project, be able to reference AutoFac, I need to come up here into my solution and add AutoFac into that project. So I'm going to go Manage NuGet Packages for Solution. I'm going to click Manage on AutoFac, and I'm going to come down and I'm going to add AutoFac into that project. So now when I come in here, it's prompting me to insert the namespace for AutoFac module. So now I can take these mappings for my business layer and I can put these into, I can override the load method on the module and stick in those registrations. Now obviously this project here now, my DI mapper is going to need a reference to my SMS sender project, my file system logger, and my interface project. So I'm just going to right click on references, say add reference, and say now this project is the project that's going to wire all of the dependencies together. So it's going to need not a reference to my UI, but it will need references to my business dependencies and data and the business interfaces, to the data dependencies and the repository interfaces and the domain model. Okay, so now I can just import the namespaces and I've got my business registry class created. Now I'm just going to do the same thing for the repository classes. So I'm going to create a repository registry which implements the AutoFac module, which inherits from AutoFac module, protected override load. Okay, now I'm going to move in the mappings for the data layer. Excellent. So now I've created two new classes, the business registry and the repository registry. And these classes are now going to be responsible for doing all of our mappings. So now what I need to do is jump up into IOC config, and instead of doing the mappings in here, what I'm going to do is actually just say load those two registries. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add a reference from my online store. I'm going to add a reference to the DI mapper. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a handle on that assembly, that project that I just created. So I'm going to make an assembly containing registries. And I'm going to get a hold of that by saying find the type business registry and then grab a hold of its assembly. And the reason what I've done there is I've grabbed a reference to the assembly that contains my business registry, because then in AutoFac I can go and on my builder I can say register assembly modules, and I can pass it that assembly. And now what it's going to do, so it's going to get a hold of that assembly and it's going to check it and it's going to register all of the modules that are in that assembly. So it'll load my business registry and my repository registry. Okay, so because we've moved these references, these mappings out of the UI project, now I can actually come in and remove them from my online store. So this always feels pretty good. I'm in here and I'm saying I am still going to need a reference to my domain model and to my interface projects and to my DI mapper, but what I don't need anymore is a reference to my data dependency or to my business dependency. So I can OK that. It's going to build the solution to make sure everything's OK. Oh, in here we still have a reference to data dependencies. You can see all of these are namespaces that I no longer need. I'll just do a quick tidy up with those. Excellent. Now we've moved our dependency mappings into their own project, and our web project is just referencing the project that does the mappings. I'm just going to regenerate my dependency graph. Wonderful. Now we can see our online store is only depending on our DI mapper. So if I remove, so I can come over here and I can just say remove the DI mapper so it's not being shown. Excellent. So this is exactly what I'd expect to see. I've got my online store depending on my interfaces, and then they're depending on the domain model. And then we've got our dependencies, which aren't coupled at all to our UI, also depending on our repository interfaces and domain model. So you might think this was a lot of work just to make a graph look good, but this graph is really important. I get most of the teams I mentor to give me this graph every sprint review, and at a quick glance I know straight away that we've got a healthy decoupled architecture. So what we've looked at in this module is that the Onion architecture promotes layers built on interfaces and then injecting dependencies into those layers to keep coupling low and therefore maintainability high. We've had a look at how to implement the Onion architecture and how to quickly spot type coupling in the application using the dependency graph.